Hi there, I'm Amber of the Little Reeser House, where we like to celebrate and enjoy the little things in life. Today I'm excited to share the second part and the big reveal of the biggest home project I've taken on to date. That is our fireplace built-in project. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I chose a stylistic direction, sourced the materials, prepared my fireplace for stone veneer, installed that stone veneer, and then over-grouted to give it a really soft and textural look. If you're new here, I have a first part video that I will link above, and it covers how I planned out this entire build and got started by building the frame, as well as adding some DIY built-ins on either side. Before I could go on any further, I had to figure out exactly what direction I was taking this so I could start sourcing some materials. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I want it all. I had a feeling, but hey, we're on to the next weekend. As you just saw, last weekend I finished the framing for our fireplace project. Next step is I need to figure out how I want to finish it, because that will dictate whether I'm drywalling or using cement board. So what I'm ultimately thinking, I would love to do a stone veneer, something just over-grouted and really textural and beautiful. I'll insert kind of my inspiration picture down here. And if I do that, I need to do cement board, but I really need to figure out if that's the direction I'm going. It really comes down to price, availability of product, whether or not I could actually DIY it myself. I'm not sure how much masonry skill I would need to do that. So I really just need to explore my options before I can move on. So today I'm going to a store in Ontario here. We're in our second wave of lockdown, so I can't just store hop and try and find products that I like. What I had to do is just really research online, find a place that I think has something that would serve me, and then go and make an appointment with them that I can hopefully check out a few samples. We'll see how far we get, and hopefully I have a direction by the end of this day. After seeing the stone in person, I was able to find a product that matched my vision. It took me a few weeks to choose a style and color, but in the meantime, I could start to prepare the frame knowing that I was moving forward with stone. The stone product I chose is a man-made stone veneer that I would adhere with masonry grab adhesive. In order to successfully use this product, I needed to cover my frame in cement board. Cement board is a little more finicky to work with and, in my opinion, less precise than drywall, but ultimately the stone would cover it up, so it didn't matter if it was perfect. I used a 1/4 inch cement board so that I could use the score and snap method rather than a masonry blade on my saw. Essentially, you score your cut line over and over again using a straight edge and a utility knife, and then use a spare 2x4 to line it up along the line to help cleanly break it. I attached the cement board to the frame using screws specifically made for cement board. I really had to put some weight behind it when drilling them in. I ended up adding a screw through every stud on every piece of cement board with no more than 12 inches between screws. I wanted to make sure it was really fastened on there so it could hold the weight of the stone. The only thing to note here is that the side of the cement board with the writing on it should be the side facing outwards. Once the cement board was installed, I made 2 scale paper templates of our television and the mantle I wanted to install. I wanted to get an idea for both size and placement on the unit. I also caulked all the cracks of the built-in shelves using standard caulking so they would just look really sharp. I then used this Zinsser Bin shellac-based primer to cover the shelves. This primer has strong fumes, but since the shelves were made up of a variety of materials, I figured it would be the strongest base I could give them. I painted all the cracks with a brush first, and then used a foam roller to cover the rest. Once it dried, I gave it a light sanding with a fine grit sandpaper to smooth out any brush strokes. Eventually, I painted them in the same paint as our walls, Falling Snow by Behr. It was time to tackle the mantle. The paper template helped me decide on sizing, but I had to choose how I wanted the mantle to be finished. I ultimately decided I would paint it rather than stain it, so that allowed me to use MDF rather than wood to construct it. It was going to be way easier to install the mantle before the stone, and it would result in a much more cohesive look. I decided to make a box shell that would then slip onto a piece of 2x4 that was mounted on the fireplace frame. I cut the pieces of MDF using my circular saw and attached them together to create a box using some wood glue, clamps, and brad nails. I filled all the seams and nail holes with some wood filler and sanded it down smooth once it dried. I attached a piece of 2x4 to the frame of the fireplace unit. Because the cement board required special screws to go through it, I pre-drilled holes using these screws and then lined up the proper placement on my 2x4 so I could use standard construction screws to attach it to the frame behind the cement board. I was then able to slide the mantle over it and add lots of brad nails to adhere it in place. While I was at it, I also added some 2x4 chunks to the front of the frame where our TV mount would sit. The stone veneer product we wanted to use was 1.5 inch to 2 inches thick, so we needed the 2x4s to bring the mount out flush with the front of the stone. We also cut a hole for our TV cord to feed through. 5 weeks after placing our order, the stone veneer was finally ready to be picked up. We ended up selecting a man-made stone veneer product by Stone Selects. This is a Canadian-based company with a huge product selection. For our unit, we needed approximately 50 square feet with 16 linear feet of corner pieces. When all was said and done, my husband picked up about 600 pounds of stone product in our compact SUV. The process of selecting the specific stone style and color was intimidating. I wanted something neutral with some color variation, but fairly light and soft feeling. I ended up settling on the Southern Rubble style in the color Kentucky. When we picked up the product, the stones were wet, so I admittedly had some doubts about my decision because it just looked so dark. But we laid it all out on the floor and allowed it to dry for a couple days, and it lightened significantly. When it came time to actually install it, I was really overwhelmed and intimidated. I'm going to link down below any videos I watched as research and prep for this entire DIY. I worried that I had got in over my head on this, but I ended up doing what is best when feeling overwhelmed. I just went back to my plan and dug in a little. I decided to make a 2-scale template of my fireplace with paper on the floor and draw in all the obstructions like the fireplace insert, the mantle, and then the TV mount 2x4s. I then spent about an hour arranging the stones in a configuration that I felt would work. And doing this really gave me the opportunity to get used to the stone sizes and colors, and it gave me the confidence to just finally get started. Rather than traditional mortar, we used a masonry grab adhesive product. This product comes in a tube that you can use in a standard caulking gun. You pipe vertical strips on the back of your stone veneer every 3 to 4 inches, and then firmly push the stone against the cement board. I started at the bottom corners and worked my way in towards the center. I used some shims along the floor to ensure that my stones weren't sitting flush against the hardwood. As I worked on the corners, I tried to alternate the corner pieces with the long side along the front and the next along the side. This makes the corners look more natural and like real solid stone. I didn't work in perfect linear lines, but more so tried to fill in the bulk of the area and left any smaller cuts to fill in as we went. The only thing I will say is that it's important to have the corners in place before filling in the area next to it with any stones. When it came time to make any cuts, I used a handheld grinder with a heavy-duty masonry blade on it to score the stone where it needed to be cut. Once my cut was about half of the way through the stone, I tapped it on a piece of scrap 2x4 to break it off. I broke a few stones in the process, but was able to use them to fill in smaller areas anyway. The process of installing the stone was like a giant and often overwhelming puzzle. I ended up completing it over a series of 3 installation sessions. It was both physically demanding and at times got a little overwhelming, but thanks to the masonry grab adhesive product, it was easy to start and stop whenever I needed to. This was by far the most intimidating part of the process, but seeing those finished stones and knowing that I did this was the most satisfying feeling. With the stone installed, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I had one major step left in the process: grouting. I knew it would be another physical process, but being so close to my final vision really motivated me to see it through, and I asked my husband for a hand, which helped with morale. This was going to be the messiest part of the entire build, so we took some time to really prep the space. We covered the shelves with plastic as well as the wall sconces and floor. We also added a tarp on the floor to protect it. My original vision was a very soft, overgrouted, washed out stone look, so I purchased a mortar mix in a cream color. By the way, all the products I used will be linked in the description box. I had never worked with mortar ever, so it really was tricky to find the right consistency at first, but the general gist of what we needed was something runny enough to pipe through a masonry grout bag, but not so runny that it dripped down the stones. It was such a fine balance. We started with water and added the mortar powder 1 scoop at a time as we mixed. Once we felt it was well combined, we let it rest for a few minutes before mixing again, and then added either more powder or more water as needed. The first few batches were too dry, but eventually we found what worked and were able to keep it coming pretty easily. When it came time to grout, I had made myself a sample block with leftover materials so I could practice before starting on the fireplace. If you try this, I would recommend doing this 100%. We worked our way through every joint, piping in mortar until it spilled out a little. We let it sit for a while as we continued to work and eventually came back in with a plastic putty knife to scrape it down and smear it into the edges of the stones. I let myself cover some of the stones, particularly in places where they were more shallow and you would expect the grout to cover them. I was looking for an English cottage feel rather than a really clean grout line. This is where things got pretty messy. Next, we used a sponge dipped in warm water to smooth out some of the roughness from scraping the mortar, also taking the opportunity to smudge the mortar over the face of the stones in a natural way. Rather than wiping it, we used the sponge to feather in from the stone edges. We also used a masonry brush to brush some of the mortar across the joints and the stone fronts. At this point, I was really scared because my cream mortar was not yet cream and it was really hard to envision the final product. However, I figured it was better to start light, knowing I could always go back in on another day and add more mortar if I felt that it wasn't over-grouted enough. As the mortar dried, I fell more and more in love with the outcome. I never did go back in with more mortar, but I easily can do that if I ever feel I want to. And all that was left to do was choose a color for the mantle. I picked up 4 different samples and tried them all. I was going for something light and neutral that didn't stand out like a sore thumb, but that was different from the built-in shelves. Really just some sort of grayish tone. I ended up settling on Revere Pewter by Benjamin Moore, a tone I am already planning to bring into this space in another way. And with that, this was by far the hardest challenge I have ever taken on. From learning new tools and products to physically and emotionally pushing myself, I can't even put into words how satisfying it is to see what this brought to our space. It brings the texture, charm, and coziness that I always envisioned for here, but beyond the final product, this process, it has helped shape me to be a little braver, a little bolder, a little more confident. And my 2-year-old daughter often points to the fireplace and says, "Mommy, do that." And it fills my heart with joy. I hope it inspires her and inspires you to try something uncomfortable, intimidating, or new, because practice really does make progress. If you liked this video, make sure you like it and leave a comment down below. I've been gaining some new friends around here and I really, truly am grateful that you're here. You can always find me behind the scenes on my Instagram, which I'll share my handle right here, or you can follow us on our blog at littlereeserhouse.com. Thanks for watching, and always remember that often the best things in life are the little things, like pushing yourself to try something big. Bye, friends.